The scanner beeped at 0400 hours. Nobody on the bridge of the ISV Eternal Dominion wanted to hear a beep at 0400 hours, especially not Ensign Dolofen, who had been staring at an empty sector of space for 6 hours and had just, finally, started to feel something close to comfortable. He looked at the screen. He looked away. He looked back. The beep came again. Dolofen was 22 years old. He had been posted to the Border Patrol fleet for exactly 4 weeks. In those 4 weeks he had logged 3 debris fields, 1 rogue comet, 14 routine cargo vessels, and a gas pocket that had briefly confused the thermal sensors into thinking there was a living creature, the size of a moon, drifting through Sector 7. There had not been a creature. It was gas. He had written a 2-page report about the gas. He had been told, by his senior officer, that the report was thorough and also unnecessary. Nobody needed 2 pages about gas. Dolofen had filed it anyway. He believed in thorough reports. It was, perhaps, the one thing he and Admiral Veth Karun had in common. He stared at the blip on his scanner. The blip stared back. It was small, a pale green dot sitting at the very edge of the long-range sensor reach, right at the border where the hegemonic galactic empires claimed space ended and the dark between stars began. Not inside Empire territory. Not outside it. Right on the line, like whoever was piloting it had looked at the boundary, thought about it, and parked there on purpose. Dolofen pulled up the identification query. Standard procedure. Every vessel that appeared within sensor range of a hegemonic border patrol ship was required, by Protocol 7 of the Border Integrity Statutes, to transmit its registration code within 60 seconds of detection. 60 seconds passed. Nothing. He ran the query again. Nothing. He checked his equipment. Everything was working fine. He ran a system diagnostic anyway, because that was what you did when results did not make sense. You checked the equipment first. You assumed you were wrong before you assumed the universe was. The equipment was fine. The blip had no registration code. He sat with that for a moment. An unregistered vessel at the border was not, technically, an emergency. There were reasons a ship might not respond immediately. Communication lag, equipment failure, a crew that was asleep. Dolofen began composing a list of possible explanations in his head, the way he had been trained to do, working from the most likely to the least. He got to number 6 on the list, pilot medical emergency, and then the blip moved. Not fast, not a jump, not an aggressive acceleration. It simply shifted, gently and deliberately, from the borderline to a course that pointed directly at the Eternal Dominion. Dolofen stared at it for another full minute. Then he went and woke up Senior Officer Vasperen, which was something he had been told never to do unless the situation was serious. Vasperen was not happy. She was a tall, Vethri woman with 4 arms that she tended to fold in specific configurations depending on her mood. All 4 were crossed right now. It's probably a derelict, she said. Caught in a drift current. Mark it and log it. It corrected course, officer. She looked at him. It corrected course, he said again. When I queried the registration, it moved after the query. Like it heard us. Vasperen uncrossed her upper 2 arms. She walked to the scanner station and looked at the blip. She ran her own query. The blip did not respond, but it also did not change course. It kept coming, slow and steady, like something that had made up its mind. She pulled up the registry. The hegemonic galactic empire maintained the most complete ship registry in the known galaxy. It had taken 400 years to build. It contained 4.2 million individual vessel classifications, broken down by species of origin, engine type, hull configuration, weapon profile, diplomatic status, and 17 additional subcategories that covered everything from cargo capacity to the specific shade of light the running lamps emitted. If a ship existed in civilized space, it was in the registry. Vasperen ran the scanner data through the registry's identification algorithm. The algorithm worked for 32 seconds. Then it returned a result that she had never seen before in 11 years of service. The field where the ship's classification should appear was completely blank. Not unknown, not pending, not classification insufficient, please provide additional data. Just blank. An empty white space where information should live. She stared at the blank. She went to wake the Admiral. Admiral Veth Karun had not been fully asleep. He rarely was anymore. He lay in his quarters in the specific state he had learned to exist in over the past 4 years. Eyes closed, body still, mind running low level through the day's protocols the way a ship runs its systems on standby power. Not resting, exactly. Just paused. When Vas Perrin knocked and entered, he was sitting up before she finished saying his name. "Report," he said. She reported. He dressed while she talked. He did not ask her to wait outside. There was no time for that kind of formality, and he had long since stopped caring about it. He pulled on his admiral's coat, dark blue, 8 decorations across the chest, every one of them earned in situations he did not like remembering, and he followed her to the bridge. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was a wide, low-ceilinged room that smelled like recycled air and old equipment, which was exactly what it was. 14 stations, 14 crew members, 7 of them now awake and at attention because word traveled fast on a ship at 0400. The main view screen showed the dark of space. The scanner station showed the blip. Veth Karuan stood in front of the scanner and looked at it. He was 61 years old. He had served the hegemonic Galactic Empire for 40 of those years. He had patrolled 6 different border sectors, commanded 4 different ships, filed enough reports to fill a small library, and personally overseen the protocols that kept this particular edge of Empire space quiet and orderly. Quiet, orderly. Those were his 2 most important words. They were the reason he took the border posting when the High Command offered it, even though other admirals his rank considered border patrol a step down. Let them think that. Order at the edges kept order at the center. He believed this the way some people believed in gods, not loudly, not with ceremony, but constantly, at a level below thought. He looked at the blank field in the registry. He looked at the course the blip was holding. "How long until it reaches sensor visual range?" he asked. "At current speed, approximately 3 hours, Admiral," Dolofen said. He had his report already partially written on his datapad. Veth Karuan noticed this. He said nothing, but he noticed. "Has it responded to any hails?" "No, sir." "Has it changed course?" "No, sir. It's holding the same heading." Veth Karuan pulled up the registry on his own screen and ran the identification algorithm himself. Not because he doubted Vas Perrin. He never doubted her. He ran it because doing the thing himself was how he verified that the universe was behaving the way the universe should behave. If he ran the same query and got the same blank result, then the blank result was real. He ran it. He got the blank result. He stood with that for a moment, his 4 hands resting flat on the console edge, and he thought. An unregistered ship at the border could mean many things. Smuggler, pirate, rogue faction, explorer who had gotten lost far outside their own territory. All of these were possible. All of these had procedures attached to them, steps to take, boxes to check, forms to file, but smugglers ran dark. They kept their engine signatures low and their courses indirect. They did not come toward a border patrol fleet in a straight line. Pirates did not approach single ships. They were opportunists, not suicidal. Rogue factions usually had someone willing to eventually answer a hail. Lost explorers asked for help. This ship was not asking for anything. It was just coming. "Full sensor sweep," he said. "Everything we can pull. Engine type, hull material, mass readings, anything. I want a picture of what we're looking at." The crew moved. Veth Karuan went to his command chair and sat down and watched the scanner. The blip kept coming. 40 minutes later, the first solid sensor data came back. Ensign Dolofen brought it to the Admiral personally, on a datapad, with a report attached. The report was 4 pages. Veth Karuan read all of it. Then he read it again. The ship's hull was primarily iron alloy construction, with what appeared to be ceramic plating, layered over sections of it in an irregular pattern that suggested the plating had been added after the original construction, not built in. The mass readings were consistent with a mid-range cargo vessel, not a military ship, not even close. The engine signature was unfamiliar but fell within the general parameters of fusion drive technology. The power output was consistent with a ship that was traveling, not powering weapons. It had no weapons array that the sensors could identify. It was also not running a stealth field. This last detail was the one Veth Karuan kept coming back to. A ship with no registration, approaching a border patrol fleet in a straight line, in the middle of the night cycle, with no stealth, no cloaking, no attempt at hiding. Not hiding. not hiding at all. Whatever was flying that ship was not afraid of being seen. He did not find this comforting. "There's one more thing, Admiral," Dolofen said. He was holding the datapad in a way that suggested he was not sure he wanted to hand over what was on it. Veth-Karun looked at him. "The ship is broadcasting, sir. Active signal. Not a distress call. Not a navigation beacon. It's on a very old frequency. Our communications team had to pull archive records to even identify what frequency it was. It's a spectrum the Empire stopped using for general communications approximately 230 years ago. What is it transmitting?" Dolofen placed the datapad on the console edge. The communications officer ran it through translation. It took about 17 minutes. 10. Veth-Karun looked at the translation on the screen. It was music. Not a message encoded in musical tones. Not a mathematical sequence dressed up to look like music. Actual music. A pattern of sounds arranged according to some structure his translation software could barely map, with a rhythm that repeated and shifted and came back, and underneath it all something that he had no word for in Imperial Standard. A sound made by the human voice, or something like a human voice, rising and falling in a way that the translation notes described as singing. The translation team had done their best with the words. The notes at the bottom of the translation acknowledged that much was likely lost in the conversion, that human music of this type relied heavily on tonal qualities that did not survive the process intact. But the words were there. It was a song about a storm. An ocean storm. The translation footnote clarified that an ocean was a vast body of water on a planetary surface, which Veth-Karun already knew, and that ocean-going vessels were a pre-spaceflight form of transport, which he also knew. The sailors in the song were far from shore. The storm was getting worse. The ship was old and the sea was angry, and the men on the ship knew, the song made clear, that they might not make it back. They went into the storm anyway. Veth-Karun read the translated lyrics 3 times. He was not certain exactly what he was feeling. He had a strong preference for being certain about what he was feeling, because uncertain feelings led to imprecise decisions, and imprecise decisions led to disorder. He filed uncertain feelings away and returned to them later, when he had more information. He filed this one away. "What species is the frequency historically associated with?" he asked. Dolofen hesitated. "The archive records aren't completely clear, sir." The frequency was briefly used for interspecies diplomatic communications during the pre-consolidation period. But the song itself, the translation team thinks it's human. The structure matches what little we have on human musical traditions. The bridge was quiet. Veth-Karun had read the Empire's file on humans. Everyone at his level had. It was a thin file, embarrassingly thin for a species that had existed under passive observation for over 2 centuries. The file described a small civilization at the edge of known space, carbon-based, bipedal, relatively soft-bodied, in the early stages of interstellar travel. Pre-consolidation notes tagged them as low threat, monitor passively, low priority. The file had not been updated in a very long time. He looked at the scanner. The blip kept coming. It was not going around the fleet. It was not veering off. It had picked a heading like someone drawing a straight line between 2 points, and it was holding that line with the calm confidence of something that had been told where it was going and had no intention of stopping. "Admiral." It was Vesperen, at the communication station. "Should we attempt hailing again?" "Yes," he said. "All standard frequencies. Imperial Standard. Diplomatic channels. The old frequency it's using. Try everything." They tried everything. The ship did not respond. It did not change course. It kept playing its music about the sailors in the storm, broadcasting it across the dark into nothing and everything, as if it wanted to make absolutely sure that whatever was out there knew it was coming. Veth-Karun thought about the empty field in the registry, the blank white space where 4.2 million classifications lived, but this one did not. He thought about the straight line the ship was holding. He thought about the sailors in the song, the ones who saw the storm coming and sailed into it anyway. And he thought about how that was not the behavior of something that was afraid. He thought, only something that doesn't fear being heard broadcast that loudly. He thought, everything that has ever caused real trouble in this galaxy has first appeared as something small and unregistered on a quiet scanner at 0400. He did not say any of this out loud. "Wake the rest of the crew," he said. Battle stations precautionary. I don't want anyone panicking. I want everyone ready. Sir, Dolofen said carefully, because he was careful in the way that young officers are when they think they might be about to ask something unwise. What exactly should I tell them we are preparing for? Veth Karuan looked at the blip. Tell them we have an unregistered vessel on an intercept heading and we are following standard protocol for unknown contacts. He paused. Tell them to stay calm. He went back to his command chair and sat. The blip kept coming. 3 hours, the ensign had said. 3 hours until visual range. Veth Karuan pulled up his console and began drafting a preliminary report to High Command. He wrote clearly and precisely, the way he always did, laying out the facts in order from most to least certain. Unknown vessel. No registry match. Not responding to hails. Approaching on direct heading. Broadcasting on antique frequency. Signal content. Human musical tradition. Pre-spaceflight era. He got to the end of the factual section and stopped. There was a space at the bottom of the preliminary report format for the commanding officer's initial assessment. His assessment of the situation. What he thought it was. What he thought the risk level was. He had filled in that space hundreds of times without pausing. He stared at it. He did not know what to write. He had an empire's worth of protocols and a registry of 4.2 million classifications and 40 years of experience. And the small green blip on his scanner did not fit inside any of it. He left the assessment blank. The music kept playing. Outside, across the dark, the ship kept coming. The briefing room on the Eternal Dominion was not built for large gatherings. It had a long table, 8 chairs, a holographic projector in the center that flickered on its left side if you didn't tap it twice before turning it on, and walls that were slightly too close together for comfort. It smelled like old reports and cold coffee, or the Vethri equivalent of coffee, which was a bitter root drink that everyone on board consumed in large quantities, and nobody enjoyed, but also nobody could function without. 6 people were seated at the table. Admiral Veth Karun stood at the head of it. 2 hours had passed since the blip appeared. 1 hour remained before the ship reached visual range. The bridge crew had the scanner. These 6 people had everything else: the research, the archives, the intelligence files, and the job of telling the Admiral what he was looking at before it arrived. They had not been doing a great job so far. Let's go through it again, Veth Karuan said. His voice was flat in the way that flat voices get when the person using them is being very careful not to let anything else through. Everything we have. From the beginning. Senior Intelligence Officer Marek Doss pulled up the holographic display. The projector flickered. He tapped it twice. It stabilized. A rotating image of a small blue-green planet appeared above the table, surrounded by a single large moon. Human home system, Marek Doss said. 3rd planet from a mid-sized yellow star. Designated in our records as Sol 3. Local name Earth. Current population approximately 9 billion, though our most recent census data is 11 years old, so the actual number may differ. How differ? Veth Karun asked. Marek Doss looked uncomfortable. We're not certain, Admiral. Humans have a relatively high growth rate compared to most spacefaring species, but they also experience population loss events with some regularity, so projecting forward is difficult. Population loss events, said Commander Yethrala, who was the fleet's chief medical officer, and had been pulled into the briefing because the biology questions were already getting complicated. You mean disease, natural disaster? Mostly war, said analyst Povin Sayel from the far end of the table. She was the youngest person in the room, 26 years old, and she had the specific look of someone who had been awake reading files for 3 hours straight. Her eyes were slightly too wide. She had 3 data pads in front of her and had been flipping between them since the briefing started. Everyone looked at her. War, she said again. Humans fight each other. A lot. That's where most of the population loss comes from. Not disease, not disaster. Other humans. The room was quiet for a moment. Every civilization has internal conflict, Marek Doss said, carefully. That's not unusual. This is different, Povin Sayel said. She pulled one of her data pads up and projected a secondary display beside the planet image. It showed a timeline. A long one. I've been going through the historical archive files we have on Earth. They're incomplete, but there's enough. Humans have been engaged in organized, large-scale armed conflict with other humans for as far back as their recorded history goes. Not border skirmishes, Not territorial disputes that get resolved in a generation. Actual wars. Wars with names. Wars they remembered and named and wrote books about, and then taught to their children so the children would know. They taught their children about the wars? Commander Yethrala said. So the children wouldn't forget them. Pavan Sayel said. Or so they'd understand why the next ones happened. The files are a bit unclear on which reason was more common. Maybe both. Veth Karun looked at the timeline. It was dense with marks. Almost no empty space. How many wars are we looking at in total? Pavan Sayel made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Our records only cover about a third of human history in any detail, Admiral. And in that third, I've counted over 250 significant conflicts. Significant meaning more than 10,000 casualties. If you include smaller engagements, the number is much higher. 2. The room sat with that. What's their current military status? Veth Karun asked. Do they have a standing interstellar fleet? Weapons systems we should be aware of? That's where things get complicated, Marek Daw said. He pulled up another display numbers, charts, fleet estimates. Our passive observation data from the last 30 years suggests they have a functioning interstellar capability. Ships. Probably weapons on those ships. We have identified approximately 40 vessels that have left their home system in the past decade, though most appear to be exploratory or commercial in nature. He paused. We have not been able to get a clear look at any military vessels. They don't transmit detailed data, and we have maintained observation distance per standard protocol for developing species. So we don't know what their military looks like. Veth Karun said. No, Admiral. And the ship currently on an intercept heading toward my fleet. What is that? Also unknown, Marek Doss admitted. The hull configuration doesn't match any of the 40 vessels we've logged before. It may be a new design. It may be a private vessel. We simply don't have enough data. Veth Karun turned to Pavan Sayel. She seemed to have the most data, or at least the most willingness to say things out loud. What else? Keep going. She nodded and looked at her pads. About 130 years ago, humans developed a weapon capable of ending all life on their planet. Multiple warring factions developed it simultaneously. Our archive notes describe it as a fission-based explosive device, scalable, deliverable from aircraft or missile systems. She looked up. They built thousands of them. Another silence. And then? Commander Yethrala asked. And then they spent the next 80 years pointing them at each other. Pavan Sayel said. They called it deterrence. The idea was that if both sides had enough of them, neither side would ever use them, because using them would mean everyone died. That's an extremely unstable system, Marek Doss said. Yes, Pavan Sayel agreed. They knew that. They argued about it constantly. They held international conferences about it. They wrote political philosophy about it. Some of their greatest thinkers spent their entire careers explaining in very clear terms why the system was dangerous and could fail at any point. She paused. They kept building more weapons anyway. Why? Commander Yethrala asked. She was leaning forward now, her secondary arms resting on the table edge, the medical officer part of her brain clearly wrestling with what she was hearing. Because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing, Pavan Sayel said. Or that's my reading of it. Each side was afraid that if they stopped and the other side didn't, they'd be weak. So they both kept going. Did they ever use them? Veth Karun asked. The weapons. Twice. Early on. Before the main arms buildup. Against each other during a large-scale ground conflict. The casualty numbers are in the file. She did not read them out loud. She did not need to. The way she looked at the datapad said, enough. After that, no. Not on that scale. They came close several times. Multiple occasions in the historical record where the decision was made or nearly made, and then reversed. Sometimes reversed because of a technical error being caught in time. Sometimes reversed because one person in a command position made a different choice than they were supposed to. One person, Veth Karun said. One person, she confirmed. The files document at least 3 separate incidents where a single individual, acting against protocol or orders or equipment readings, chose not to escalate. And that choice is the reason the planet still has people on it. She set the datapad down. The whole system ran on individuals deciding in the moment to be something other than what the situation demanded. And somehow it worked. For generations it worked. The room was quiet again. But differently this time. Not the quiet of shock. The quiet of people doing math in their heads and not liking the answers. They survived, Veth Karun said finally. It wasn't really a question. 4 extinction-level events in 2 centuries, Pavan Sayel said. I flagged them in the file. 1 was the weapons standoff period. They came close enough that I'm counting it. 1 was a viral pathogen that spread globally within months and killed a significant portion of their population before they contained it. 1 was environmental. They altered the chemistry of their own atmosphere through industrial activity and spent about a century dealing with the consequences. 1 was... She stopped. What? She looked at the table. 1 was an asteroid, heading directly for Earth. They detected it approximately 18 months before projected impact. She picked up the data pad. They launched 6 ships, old ships by the standards they had at the time, barely capable of the mission. They intercepted the asteroid at distance, and they broke it apart and redirected the pieces. How? Commander Yathrala said. They rammed it, Pavan Sayel said. The first 4 attempts used remote detonations. The 5th ship lost communications mid-approach, and the crew made the decision to continue the mission manually, without contact with home, and completed it on instrumentation alone. She finally looked up. All 5 crew members survived, barely. Nobody said anything. You mentioned 4 events, Veth Karun said. 3 of those they caused themselves. Yes, Admiral. So they survived 4 near-extinction events, and 3 of them were situations they created. That's correct. He looked at the rotating image of the small blue-green planet above the table. It looked, from this angle, almost fragile. It did not seem like the kind of world that produced things that survived that much. There's one more thing, Pavan Sayel said. She had been building to this. He could see it in the way she had been ordering the information, putting the heaviest piece last. He waited. She pulled up a section of file on her datapad and read from it directly, not translating or summarizing. Reading. This is from a human medical and psychological research archive. The document is about 110 years old. She cleared her throat. The condition described here is called traumatic bonding. It refers to a pattern observed in humans where a strong emotional attachment forms between an individual and the source of their pain or danger. Not in spite of the danger. Because of it. The closer the threat, the stronger the bond. She set the datapad down. The document describes it as a pathology, a problem, something to be treated. She looked at the Admiral. The thing is, she said, I've been reading human cultural output for 3 hours. Literature, recorded history, documented behavior patterns across multiple centuries, and this pattern attaching to the thing that hurts you, going back to the difficult thing, choosing the storm over the safe harbor. It's everywhere. It's in their war records. It's in their exploration logs. It's in their stories and their songs. She paused. It's everywhere, Admiral. Which makes me think, maybe it's not a pathology. Maybe it's just how they work. The flickering holographic planet turned slowly above the table. Nobody moved. Veth Karun thought about the music. The sailors in the storm. The ones who saw the water rising and the sky turning dark and sailed toward it anyway. He had read those lyrics 4 times since Dolofen first put the translation in front of him. And each time he had told himself he was looking for tactical information. He was not looking for tactical information. He was trying to understand why someone would do that. Why you would look at a storm and choose it over the shore. The ship, he said. This ship that is coming toward us. It has no registration. It has no weapons that we can detect. It has not responded to any hail. It is not hiding, not running, not taking any kind of evasive action. No, sir, Marakdas confirmed. And we have 13 warships between it and Empire territory, armed, ready, representing the full response capability of a border patrol fleet of the hegemonic Galactic Empire. Yes, sir. Veth Karun looked at the blank space in the registry. The empty field that 4.2 million classifications had not managed to fill. And it's still coming, he said. Yes, Admiral, still coming. He looked at Pavan Sayel. She was watching him with the expression of someone who had done the math and arrived somewhere she had not expected. Based on everything in those files, he said, what would you say the ship's intention is? She thought about it. She took the question seriously, which he respected. I don't think it intends to attack us, she said. That's not what the behavioral pattern suggests. Humans attack when they feel cornered, or when they're protecting something. This ship isn't cornered. It chose this heading. Argo. Then what does it want? She was quiet for a moment. I think it wants to get somewhere, she said. And we're in the way. The projector hummed. The planet turned. Somewhere through the walls of the briefing room and down the corridor and through the bridge door, the scanner kept its steady watch on the small green blip that had been holding its heading for 2 hours without flinching. Veth Karuan looked at his officers. Battle stations remain active, he said. Full sensor recording on the incoming vessel. I want everything. Every reading. Every emission. Every signal. DOS, I want 2 more analysts pulled from their bunks and on that file. I want to know everything you can find about human ships, human captains, and human reasons for doing things that don't make sense. Yes, Admiral. And get someone to keep monitoring the broadcast. He picked up his datapad and stood. The music. Keep translating it. All of it. I want the whole song. He walked to the door. He stopped. He turned back to look at Provincial, who was already reaching for her datapads again, already diving back into the files with the specific focus of someone who had found a problem interesting enough to forget about sleep entirely. Analyst Provincial, he said. She looked up. The 3 extinction-level events they caused themselves, he said. The weapons, the pathogen, the atmosphere. Yes, Admiral. Did they fix them? She held his gaze. All 3, she said. Not quickly, not without loss. But yes, all 3. He nodded once. He walked out of the briefing room and back toward the bridge. The ship was still coming. 1 hour to visual range. He thought about what Provincial had said, about attaching to the difficult thing, going back to the storm. He thought about his own 40 years on the edges of Empire space, choosing the border posting when he could have had something easier and closer to home, and he told himself it was not the same thing. He mostly believed it. The order to reposition took 11 minutes to execute. 11 minutes was fast. For a border patrol fleet of 13 warships, spread across a defensive arc covering a sector boundary, to receive a command, confirm it, adjust their courses, and settle into a new formation, 11 minutes was, by any Imperial standard, an excellent response time. Veth Karun had drilled his fleet on exactly this kind of repositioning for 3 years. He had run the exercise 42 times. The record was 9 minutes, 40 seconds, achieved on a quiet Tuesday with nothing else going on. Today was not a quiet Tuesday. 11 minutes. He stood on the bridge and watched it happen on the tactical display. 13 green markers, each one a warship, each one carrying hundreds of crew members and enough firepower to level a small moon, sliding smoothly into their assigned positions like pieces on a game board, being arranged by a careful hand. The arc they formed was wide and deep. Any ship approaching from the direction of the blip would have to pass through it or go around it, and going around it would take so long that the fleet could easily adjust. There was no going around this. When the last ship confirmed its position, Veth Karun looked at the formation on the display for a moment and felt the thing he always felt when a complex operation landed exactly where it was supposed to land. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter than pride. The satisfaction of order made real, of preparation paying off, of the universe behaving, for at least this moment, the way careful planning had intended it to. He had built his career on that feeling. All ships confirm weapon systems active, Commander Yethrala reported from the tactical station. She had moved there from the briefing room, her medical role temporarily set aside. Right now, the fleet needed a tactician more than a doctor. Every cannon hot, missile bays primed, point defense grids online. We are at full combat readiness, Admiral. Acknowledged, Veth Karun said. No one fires without my direct order. Pass that to every ship commander. Specifically, not a general combat readiness reminder. My direct order. Each commander repeats it back to me personally. He waited while Yethrala sent the message and collected the 13 individual confirmations. 13 ship commanders, each one saying in their own words, I will not fire without the Admiral's direct order. He listened to all 13. He did this not because he doubted his commanders. He did it because he wanted every one of them to hear themselves say the words, to feel the weight of them. Because the last thing this situation needed was someone on one of those 13 ships making a fast decision with a slow consequence. The blip was 40 minutes out now. 25 minutes to visual range. Dolofen was at the scanner station. He had not left it since the start of his shift. His relief officer had come to take over twice, and Dolofen had, both times, politely refused to move. Veth Karun had let it go. The ensign was frightened, and the scanner was the thing he knew how to handle. Let him handle it. Signal still broadcasting. Admiral, Dolofen reported. No change in frequency. No change in content. It's the same song. It's been playing on a loop since we first detected it. 1. Volume? Increasing slightly as they get closer, sir. The signal itself hasn't changed, but we're picking up more detail now. The communications team says they can hear. They described it as background noise. Something in the ship's environment coming through on the broadcast. They think it might be uninstructional, not deliberate. Veth Karun looked at him. What kind of background noise? Dolofen checked his pad. They said it sounded like plants. A pause on the bridge. Plants, Veth Karun repeated. Yes, sir. The specific description in the communications report is, sounds consistent with a pressurized growing environment. Air circulation systems. Moisture regulation. That sort of thing. Veth Karun wrote nothing down. He was past the point of taking notes and into the point of simply collecting information and holding it, because he did not yet have enough to know what any of it meant. A ship that was broadcasting music and had, somewhere on board, what sounded like a garden, coming toward 13 warships. In a straight line, he sat down in his command chair and put his hands flat on his knees and looked at the main view screen, which still showed nothing but dark and stars, because the ship was not yet visible to the naked eye or to the optical sensors. 22 minutes. He waited. It appeared first as a shape against the starfield, not dramatic. Not the way ships appeared in the old military paintings, blazing out of light with engines roaring. It was just a shape, gradually becoming distinct from the background dark, the way a rock becomes visible in shallow water as you get closer. One moment it wasn't there on the view screen, and the next moment it was. And then with each passing minute it became more detailed. The bridge crew went very quiet. Veth Karun looked at it. His tactical officer, Senior Commander Drevolas, 20 years under Veth Karun's command, decorated twice for service in the Outer Reaches campaign, said, in a low and careful voice, Admiral, that is not a warship. No, Veth Karun said. That's a freighter. It was. Even at this distance, even with the sensor readings still coming in and the optical zoom working to sharpen the image, there was no mistaking what kind of ship it was. Veth Karun had seen enough of both to know them apart. Warships had a particular shape, sleek, angular, built for speed and threat, with weapons arrays visible along the hull like the spines of a dangerous animal, advertising itself. Everything about a warship said, look at what I can do to you. This ship said nothing of the sort. It was wide, heavy-looking, built in the blocky, practical way that things built to carry. Other things tend to be built not elegant, not threatening, just large and solid and functional. The hull was dull gray-brown, the color of old metal that had spent a long time in space and been repaired many times and had never once been repainted for the sake of looking good. There were patches on it, actual patches, sections of hull material that were slightly different in color and texture from what was around them, welded on over what must have been damage or wear, and welded in the specific rough-edged way that suggested they had been done by hand, one at a time, by someone working with what they had available. It was not a pretty ship. It did not look dangerous. It looked like something that had been a long way from home many times and come back each time slightly more repaired and slightly less new. Full sensor sweep, Veth Karun said. Everything. Now, the results came back in stages as the ship got closer and the sensors got more data. Hull, iron alloy base with ceramic overlay and irregular patches, as previously identified. No stealth plating. No energy shielding of any kind that the sensors could detect. Mass. Consistent with a mid-range cargo hauler. Carrying cargo, the internal mass reading suggested the hold was not empty, though what was in it the sensors could not specify at this range. Engine. A single primary drive and 2 secondary drives. The configuration, unfamiliar, but functional. The main engine was doing something that the engineering team, after looking at the output readings for several minutes, reported was not strictly within the parameters of what that class of engine should be capable of doing. They said it with the tone of people who felt they were being personally offended by the physics involved. Weapons array? None. The tactical display showed the area where weapon systems would normally be along the upper dorsal hull, where a ship of this class and size would typically carry at least a basic armament. That space was there. The structural supports for it were there. The mounting points for a weapon system existed. The weapon system did not. The sensor team reported that the space had been repurposed. The life support readings in that section of the hull were different from the rest of the ship. Higher humidity, specific atmospheric composition, grow lighting consistent with photosynthetic activity. Someone had taken out the guns and put in a greenhouse. Drevolas said, "I'm going to need a moment," and stepped back from his station. Nobody laughed. Nobody had anything to say. Veth Karun looked at the ship on the view screen. It was close enough now that the name on the hull was becoming readable. Human script. Large letters painted across the bow in white paint that had faded to a yellowish cream with age and radiation exposure. The translator worked on it for about 4 seconds. Last reasonable option. Veth Karun read it twice. He thought about what Pavensale had said in the briefing room. About humans and their attachment to difficult things. About how they went back to the storm. He thought about what it meant that this ship, this battered, patched together, gunless, garden-carrying freighter, with a name like a last resort, was what they had sent. Not a warship, not an ambassador vessel, not anything that a civilization worried about making a good first impression would choose. Drevolas had collected himself and returned to his station. He stood looking at the view screen for a moment. Then he said, quietly, the words that had been sitting in the room since the ship appeared. "Admiral, if this is their reasonable option." He stopped. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Every person on the bridge heard the rest of it without him saying it. If this was the reasonable option, the measured response, the considered and deliberate choice, then the options they had decided against using were something else entirely. Veth Karun did not respond. He was thinking about his 40 years of service, about the protocols he had written and the borders he had held and the belief, the core belief, that had run underneath everything he had ever done, that the universe responded to preparation, that if you were ready enough, organized enough, thorough enough, the unpredictable things could be contained, could be managed, could be made to fit inside the systems you had built to handle them. He had 13 warships. He had weapon systems that could end this conversation before it started. He had 4.2 million classifications and decades of institutional knowledge, and every tool the Empire had given him to respond to a threat. The ship coming toward him had a greenhouse. It had also, apparently, decided that 13 armed warships, forming a defensive wall across its path, was not a reason to change direction. He looked at the blank field in the registry on his console screen. He had been looking at it, on and off, for 3 hours. It had been bothering him in a way he could not precisely name. It was not fear, or not only fear. It was something closer to the feeling he got when he opened a report and found that a piece of information he had assumed was there was simply missing. A gap where certainty should be. He had spent his career filling gaps. This gap was not fillable. Not yet. "The ship is reducing speed," Dolofen reported from the scanner station. His voice was steady. The ensign had grown steadier as the night went on. Veth Karun had noticed. Fear had settled in him and then gone quiet, the way it sometimes does when you accept that the situation is what it is. Not stopping, just slowing, like it's settling into an approach rather than a crossing. "Is it hailing us?" "No, sir." "Still just the music?" Veth Karun stood up from his command chair and walked to the view screen. He stood close to it, looking at the last reasonable option, filling more and more of the display as it closed the distance. He could see the patches on the hull more clearly now, could count them. 17 distinct patches, each one slightly different, each one a repair made at a different time with different materials. Like reading rings in a tree, the history of every hard thing this ship had survived was written on its outside in mismatched metal. The greenhouse where the guns should be. The song about the storm. The straight, unbroken line from the border to his fleet, never deviating, never hesitating, like a thing that had made a decision a long time ago and had simply been carrying it out ever since. He thought about what Pavensale had said about the single individuals, the ones who had reversed the extinction events at the last moment, the ones who, standing at the exact point where everything could go wrong, had chosen differently than the situation demanded of them. He wondered what this ship's captain had chosen differently. He wondered what they had decided was worth sailing through 13 warships to deliver. The last reasonable option kept coming. Slower now, but coming. It broadcast its music into the dark, the singer's voice winding through the old words about the storm and the ship and the water rising, and the 14,000-year-old question at the center of it. Whether you go into the storm, or you don't, hung in the air of the bridge without anyone saying it. "Admiral," Drevolas said from behind him. His voice was different now, not tactical, closer to something personal. "What do we do?" Vethkarun looked at the ship. He looked at the name on its hull. He thought about what it meant to call something the last reasonable option, what you had to have tried before you got there. What you had to have decided was not reasonable enough. What kind of mind looked at 13 armed warships and thought, still reasonable? "We open a channel," he said. "A pause." "Sir?" Drevolas said. "All frequencies, including the old one they've been using." He turned from the view screen and walked back to his command chair. "We've been talking at them for 3 hours and getting no answer. Let's try the other way. Let's listen." He sat. "Open the channel," he said. "And someone go and wake Analyst Pavinsale." Drevolas raised a hand. "She's already awake, Admiral. She never went back to sleep. She's been in the briefing room with the files." Vithkarun nodded. That was what he had expected. "Get her up here," he said. "I want her at a station when that ship answers." He looked at the view screen. The last reasonable option hung there against the stars, battered and large and entirely unbothered by the wall of armed ships it was approaching, growing slowly larger with every minute, broadcasting its music, carrying its cargo, doing whatever it had decided to do. He opened his console and looked at the blank field in the registry one more time. Then he closed it. There was no classification for this. There was no protocol that covered it perfectly. There was only the ship, and the channel he had just opened, and the silence on the other end of it waiting to become something else. He waited. The music played. For a long moment after the channel opened, there was nothing. Not static. Not interference. The channel was clean and clear and completely empty. And the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was so quiet that Vethkarun could hear the ventilation system cycling air through the ceiling ducts above his head, a sound he had long since stopped noticing, and was noticing now only because everything else had stopped. Then, from the speakers, came the sound of something being set down on a hard surface, a cup or a container of some kind, the soft knock of it landing, and then a voice. It was a human voice, lower than he had expected based on the translated singing, rougher at the edges, carrying the specific texture of someone who had been awake for a long time and had passed through tired and come out the other side into a kind of flat alertness. She said, "Yeah, go ahead." Not a greeting, not an identification, not the formal opening that the hegemonic communications protocol designated as the required first transmission in any first contact situation, which was a specific 14-word phrase in Imperial Standard that established identity, intent, and peaceful approach. "Yeah, go ahead." As if she had been expecting the call, as if she had been waiting for them to figure out how to make it. Vethkarun looked at his communications officer, who looked back at him. He had prepared a formal opening statement. He had written it while waiting, the way he prepared for everything, carefully and in full. He looked at the statement on his console. He set it aside. "This is Admiral Vethkarun of the hegemonic Galactic Empire Border Patrol Fleet," he said. "You are speaking to the commanding officer of this sector. I am hailing you on all available frequencies." He paused. "You have been in communications range for over 3 hours." "I know," the voice said. "I was waiting for you to switch to the old channel, a sound that might have been chewing. The others weren't going to work." Analyst Pavinsale, standing at a secondary station to Vethkarun's left, made a note on her datapad. "How did you know we were broadcasting on the other frequencies?" he asked. "Because that's what I would have done first," she said. "Standard approach. Try the obvious things before the less obvious things." The chewing sound again. "You took about the right amount of time, actually. I thought it might be a bit longer." Vethkarun set this aside also. He had questions, but they were not the first questions. "You are operating an unregistered vessel in a border sector of the hegemonic Galactic Empire," he said. You have not responded to standard identification requests. You have not complied with border approach protocols. You are currently in violation of 17 protocols, she said. I counted. The Border Integrity Statutes, Section 4 through Section 9, the Unregistered Vessel Approach Ordinance, the First Contact Communication Requirements under the Diplomatic Outreach Act, and a few others that are more technical. A pause. I'm also operating without a hegemonic approach permit, which I know is technically a separate category. The bridge crew was very still. You read our protocols, Veth Karun said. I read everything I could find before I left, she said. Which wasn't everything. Your legal code is very large, and not all of it is publicly accessible to outside parties. But I found enough. Another pause, longer. I know I'm in violation. I'm not here to argue about that. Pavan Sayal wrote something and held her datapad up so Veth Karun could see it without turning his head. The note said, She's not worried about the violations. Start with why she's here. He had already been going there. Then tell me, he said, why you are here. The sound on the channel shifted. A small movement, like she had sat forward or leaned back. When she spoke again, the rough edge in her voice was still there, but something under it had settled. The way something settles when it has been waiting to be asked a specific question, and the question has finally arrived. My name is Dara Ose, she said. I'm the captain and sole crew of the Last Reasonable Option. I'm a licensed commercial transport operator out of Earth, 17 years active. I'm carrying a cargo of medical supply packs, general field medicine, surgical tools, antibiotic stores, approximately 600 tons of seed stock rated for varied growing conditions, and 200 tons of water filtration equipment. Full manifest is attached. I'm transmitting it now. The communications board showed the incoming data file. Veth Karun's officer confirmed it and opened it. It was, as she said, a manifest, detailed, itemized, formatted correctly in Imperial Standard Trade Documentation structure. My destination, Dara Ose continued, is Vareth Colony. Sector 9, your designation. I believe you classify it as a hegemonic colony world. Population listed in Imperial Census records as 43,412 people, as of 6 years ago. Veth Karun knew the colony. He knew it the way he knew all the settlements in his patrol sector, as a marker on a map, a line in a census report, a location that existed in his administrative awareness, without ever demanding his attention. Vareth Colony, agricultural settlement, established 80 years ago, self-sustaining, stable. The kind of place that generated no emergency reports because nothing happened there worth reporting. It had been under quarantine for 6 years. Vareth Colony is currently under quarantine order, he said. Issued by Imperial Health Authority. Active and in force. No vessels are permitted entry or exit without explicit authorization from the Health Authority Central Office. I know, she said. Then you understand that your stated destination is not accessible to you. I know the quarantine is active, she said. I also know that Section 12 of the Quarantine Enforcement Statute includes an override clause, an emergency humanitarian exception. If the commanding officer of the relevant border sector determines that a genuine humanitarian emergency exists at the quarantine site, they have the authority to issue a temporary access permit for relief supply vessels. She stopped. Then, I'm transmitting a second document now. The communications board showed another incoming file, larger than the first. The officer opened it, and Veth Karun looked at the summary on his console screen. It was a welfare assessment report, not an official Imperial one. This was clearly assembled from multiple sources, fragments of official data, some of it marked as internal health authority records that should not have been accessible to an outside party, combined with third-party observer reports and what appeared to be personal correspondence from individuals on or near Vareth Colony. The quarantine had been in force for 6 years. The last official Imperial welfare check on Vareth Colony had been conducted 4 years ago. The report from that check was brief and classified, but fragments of it were here. The health authority had noted declining population stability, reduced communication output from the colony, supply chain disruption. 2. The most recent data in Dara Ose's document was 7 months old. It came from a source identified only by a code number. No name, no affiliation. It was a population estimate, a range, not a precise count. because precise counts required cooperation and access. The low end of the range was 10,000. The high end was 12,000. Veth Karuun read the numbers. He read them again. 43,000 people 6 years ago. At most 12,000 now. He did not speak immediately. The bridge was quiet enough that the ventilation sound was back. That background hum of a ship maintaining itself. Nobody moved. Everyone was looking at their consoles or at the floor or at the view screen where the last reasonable option hung in space outside. Its patched hull and its faded name visible in the light of distant stars. Dara Ose did not fill the silence. She waited. She had, apparently, learned something about silence and what to let it do. "Where did you get this data?" Veth Karuun asked. His voice was level. He had trained it to be level in moments when the alternative was not acceptable. "I'm not going to tell you that," she said. "Not because I don't trust you, Admiral. Because the person who got it to me took a significant risk to do it, and I'm not going to put a name in a conversation I know is being recorded." Low. He looked at the population estimate again. "The quarantine," he said. "The original health authority order. Do you know why it was issued?" A pause. "Not a long one. Just long enough to mean something." "I have a partial picture," she said. "Not the full one. There was a pathogen, a local one, something native to that region of the planet's ecology that the colonists didn't have natural resistance to. The quarantine was issued to contain it. That part I understand. And a 6-year quarantine for a contained pathogen is unusual. Standard protocol for that class of biological event is 18 to 36 months maximum before reassessment. This one hasn't been reassessed." Another pause. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just noting that 31,000 people is a very large number to subtract from a colony in 6 years, and the supplies I'm carrying are not complicated or experimental. They're field medicine and food and water filtration. Basic things. Things that should have been going in all along." Veth Karuun looked at the numbers on his screen. He thought about the protocols, about Section 12 and the override clause. He had known about the clause. He had read the quarantine enforcement statute when Vareth Colony was first designated 6 years ago, the same week the order came through. He had filed the relevant acknowledgement documents and updated his sector records and moved on, because that was what you did with a quarantine order from the health authority. You updated your records and you held the line and you trusted that the people who had issued the order had done so for good reason. He had trusted 31,000 people. "Captain Ose," he said, "walk me through the math. The override clause requires that I make a determination of imminent humanitarian emergency. What is your argument that such an emergency exists?" She made a sound, not quite a laugh. The sound of someone who has had a long night and is too tired for diplomacy but too focused to lose her thread. "Admiral, there were 43,000 people there 6 years ago. There are somewhere between 10 and 12,000 there now. If that number continues declining at the same rate, there won't be anyone left inside another 3 years." She stopped. "I don't know what your definition of imminent is, but I think we're inside it." The bridge was quiet. Senior Commander Drevolas was looking at the floor. Povinsale had stopped writing. Even Dolofen, at the scanner station, had turned slightly toward the speakers. Veth Karuun looked at the view screen. The last reasonable option. 17 patches on its hull. The greenhouse where the weapons used to be. 600 tons of seed stock. Water filtration. Medicine. He thought about every report he had filed in 6 years about Vareth Colony. How many there had been. Whether he had ever looked past the status marker quarantine, active. No action required to what the status marker meant in terms of actual people in an actual place. He thought he might know the answer to that and he did not examine it too closely right now. "You came alone," he said. "Yes. 1 ship. No escort. No diplomatic authorization. No backup." "Yes. Why?" He heard his own voice and it was closer to something real than he usually let it get in a professional setting. He adjusted. "What I mean is why you? Why this ship? Why not a formal request through diplomatic channels? Why not a coordinated humanitarian mission with official sanction?" The sound on the channel changed. A small shift, like she had moved back in her seat. When she spoke again, her voice was the same flat, direct, unhurried, but there was something underneath it that had not been there before. Not emotion, exactly. The place where emotion goes when a person has already processed it and what is left is just the fact of it. I tried the formal channels, she said. I filed 3 separate requests through Earth's diplomatic office to the hegemonic liaison authority. Over 2 years, the first one was rejected for incomplete documentation. The second one was accepted and then referred to a subcommittee. The third one is still listed as pending. The subcommittee from the second request issued a preliminary finding 14 months ago, recommending further assessment before action. A pause. I know what further assessment before action means. It means more time. It means another committee. It means more people making decisions about whether a decision needs to be made. She stopped. When she continued, her voice was the same as before. Steady. Flat. The voice of someone who has decided something and is past the point of revisiting it. I have 200 tons of water filtration equipment sitting in my hold, she said. I have medicine that expires in 14 months. I have seed stock that won't stay viable forever. And I have a number 10,000 people, maybe 12, maybe fewer by now that I cannot stop thinking about. Pause. Somebody had to go, so I went. Somebody had to go, so I went. 7 words. No elaboration, no drama, no attempt to make it sound like more than what it was. She said it the way you state a fact, the way you say the sky is a particular color or a distance is a particular length. Just the thing itself. Standing in the open. Veth Karun sat with it. He was not, in that moment, thinking about the protocols. He was not thinking about the 17 violations or the Section 12 clause, or the administrative process that would follow whatever decision he made here. He was thinking about a woman in a battered ship with a greenhouse where the guns should be, who had filed the forms and waited 2 years and watched the process move the way processes move, and had at some point looked at a number 10,000, 12,000, falling, and decided that she was done waiting. He thought about Pavinsail's words from the briefing room, about the 3 humans who had stepped back from the edge, who had chosen differently when the situation demanded something else of them. He looked at the numbers on his screen one more time. Then he made his decision. Captain Osei, he said, I am going to ask you to hold your current position for 1 hour, while I complete the required administrative process for issuing a Section 12 override permit. I will need to file documentation with the Health Authority, with my Fleet Command, and with the Sector Records Office. This is not a process I can shortcut, and I am not going to. End. A pause on her end. 1 hour, she said. 1 hour, he confirmed. The process will take as long as it takes, and I am going to do it correctly. When it is complete, you will have a temporary access permit for Verith Colony with a supply delivery designation. You will follow the approach corridor I specify. You will not deviate from that corridor. You will transmit full cargo verification at the colony's orbital station before any unloading begins. And you will submit a full mission report to this fleet's records office within 72 hours of departure from Verith. Another pause, longer than the first. Understood, she said. Her voice had shifted again. Something in it now that had not been there before. Something that arrived quietly and did not announce itself. Admiral, 1 hour, Captain, he said. Hold your position. He closed the channel. The bridge was silent. He did not look at his crew. He looked at his console, and he pulled up the documentation interface, and he began writing the Section 12 override request, correctly, in the proper format, with every required field filled in, because that was how he did things, and that was not going to change today. The first report took 20 minutes. There were 16 more to write. He wrote all of them. Outside, in the dark between stars, the last reasonable option held its position and kept playing its music. The old song about the sailors and the storm, and the voice inside it sang about going in anyway, about choosing the difficult water over the safe shore, and the sound of it came through the bridge speakers because nobody had turned it off. Nobody did. The first formal complaint arrived 14 hours after the last reasonable option passed through the fleet's defensive arc and headed toward Verith Colony. It came from the Health Authority Oversight Division, addressed to Admiral Veth Karun directly, marked urgent, and written in the specific tone of an institution that has just discovered someone did something without asking permission and wants everyone to know how they feel about that. The letter used the word unauthorized 11 times. It used the word protocol 9 times. It used the phrase deeply concerning twice, which in health authority language was approximately equivalent to screaming. Veth Karun read the letter. He filed it in the correct folder. He drafted a response that was 3 pages long, precise, and cited the exact statute and subclause he had used to authorize the override permit, with footnotes. He sent the response. He saved a copy to his personal records. The second complaint arrived 6 hours after the first. This one was from the Border Integrity Commission, which had questions about the 17 protocol violations he had allowed to pass without formal processing. He wrote that response too, 4 pages, also precise, also footnoted. The third complaint was from someone in Fleet Command, a senior administrator whose name Veth Karun recognized from budget documents and had never met in person, who wanted to know why an admiral of his rank had personally handled a first contact communication instead of routing it through the standard diplomatic relay. That response was 2 pages. He kept it short because the answer was simple, because the situation required a decision, and he had made it. By the end of the first week, he had received 9 formal complaints and 1 preliminary notice of inquiry from the Imperial Internal Review Board, which was the body that looked into decisions made by hegemonic officers that were technically within the rules, but had made enough people uncomfortable that someone felt something should be done about it. He attended the preliminary inquiry in person, by communication link, sitting at the small desk in his quarters aboard the Eternal Dominion in his full dress uniform because that was what the occasion required. He answered every question. He provided every document. He had 17 of them, all correctly filed, all complete, all submitted within the required time windows. The inquiry board had not been expecting 17 complete and correctly filed documents. They asked him to remain available for further questions. He told them he was always available and returned to his patrol duties. The last reasonable option reached Vareth Colony, 11 days after passing through the fleet. Veth Karun knew this because he had tracked it. Not officially, there was no protocol requiring him to track a vessel he had granted a supply permit to once the vessel had left his sector. He tracked it personally, on his own console, during the quiet hours of the night cycle, when the bridge was running on minimum crew, and the sector was as close to calm as it ever got. He watched the ship's beacon move across the sector map, slow and steady, the way it had moved toward his fleet, but purposeful. It did not drift. It did not deviate. It took the approach corridor he had specified to the exact degree, which he noticed and noted. When the beacon reached Vareth Colony's orbital coordinates and stopped moving, he sat with that for a while. Then he went back to his paperwork, because there was always paperwork. Analyst Pavan had not returned to her normal duties. This was not, technically, a problem. Her normal duties were general intelligence analysis for the sector, and what she was currently doing, reading everything the Empire had ever collected about humans, organizing it, annotating it, and building what she was calling a comprehensive behavioral profile, was arguably within the scope of that work. She had made a case for it in a memo she sent to Veth Karun 4 days after the last reasonable option left. The memo was 2 paragraphs. The case it made was straightforward. Given recent events, a detailed understanding of human behavior patterns was now a matter of active operational relevance rather than passive academic interest. He approved it without comment. She worked for 6 weeks. She pulled every file, every observation log, every fragment of intercepted communication, every piece of cultural material that the Empire's passive observation program had collected on humanity over 200 years. She read all of it. She cross-referenced it. She organized it in ways that the original collectors had not thought to organize it, because the original collectors had been looking at humans as a low-priority background species and had gathered data the way you gather things you don't expect to need carelessly, incompletely, without much system. She built a system. She also, during this period, managed to obtain through channels that she documented very carefully and made sure were technically within regulations, a translation of the full song that the last reasonable option had been broadcasting. Not the fragment the communications team had pulled during the initial approach. The whole thing. Every verse. She read it 3 times. Then she went and found Veth Karun. He was at his desk. He was always at his desk. She put the full translation on his console without saying anything. He read it. It took about 4 minutes. When he finished, he looked at the last verse for a while, the one about arriving, The one that came after all the verses about the storm, after the danger and the struggle and the rising water. The quiet verse at the end, about the sailors seeing the harbor lights through the dark. About getting there. He handed the translation back. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and went back to her work. 3 months after the last reasonable option reached Varith Colony, the population count came through. It was not an official imperial assessment. The health authority had not sent anyone in yet. That process was still moving through its channels, still being reviewed by its committees, still being discussed by the people who discussed such things. The count came from the colony's own records office, transmitted through a relay station in Sector 8, flagged for Veth Karun's attention by a communications officer who had been watching for it since the night everything started. The number was 14,230, not a final count, not a stable one. The transmission notes said, the colony's medical team expected it to keep improving as the supply delivery was processed and the water filtration systems came online. The seed stock had been planted. The surgical supplies had reached the colony's 2 remaining medical stations. The antibiotic stores had addressed 3 infection cases that had been untreatable for months. 14,000, up from 10 or 12, maybe fewer, at the time Dara Ose left Earth, trending upward. Veth Karun looked at the number for a long time. He thought about what 43,000 had felt like as a data point 6 years ago. A marker, a line in a census report. He thought about what 14,000 felt like now, and the difference between those two feelings was something he did not try to put into words. He just let it sit there, in whatever part of a person holds the things that matter more than they expected to. He filed the transmission in the correct folder. He added a note to his personal records. Somewhere in the outer systems, the last reasonable option was already moving. She had not stayed at Varith Colony long. There was nothing for her there, once the cargo was unloaded and verified, and the supply distribution was confirmed, and the colony's logistics team had shaken her hand, or their equivalent of shaking hands, which involved a specific gesture she had learned on the approach and executed correctly on the second try. She had spent 2 days on the orbital station. She had slept for 14 hours of those 2 days. The deep and unbeautiful sleep of someone who has been running on empty for a long time and has finally stopped. Then she had loaded what she needed, filed a departure record with the colony station, and left. She was 3 weeks into her next run when the message arrived. It was from Varith Colony, not official, personal, sent through a relay network that took its time and delivered messages when it could, the way messages travel when they cross large distances without reliable infrastructure. The message was from a woman named Ayla, who identified herself in the first line as a colony teacher. She taught the colony's children, the ones who were left, the ones who were still there and who had been. The message said, one of the people who helped distribute the seed stock when it arrived. The message was long. Ayla was clearly someone who wrote the way some people talk, with detail and with care, stopping to make sure the picture was complete before moving on. She described the day the ship appeared on their orbital sensors. She described what the colony had been like in the weeks before it arrived. She described the children in her classroom, how many there had been 6 years ago and how many were there now. And she described the morning. The first water filtration unit came online, and clean water came through the colony's distribution system for the first time in 14 months. She wrote, "We did not know anyone was coming. We had stopped expecting anyone to come." She wrote, "I don't know how you found out about us. I don't know why you came. I just know you did." She wrote, "I wanted you to know that my students are still here." Dara Ose read the message once. She put her datapad face down on the console. She looked at the starfield outside the cockpit window for a while, at the dark and the distance and the particular loneliness of being a long way from anywhere, which she had lived with for so long it had stopped feeling like loneliness and started feeling like the natural condition of things. She did not reply to the message, not because she didn't want to, because she did not know what to say that would not be smaller than the thing Ayla had written. Some things you receive and hold, and do not try to answer. Some things are complete the way they are. She pulled up her next navigation calculation. She had a cargo waiting at a depot in Sector 11. Medical supplies again, different kind, bound for a settlement on the outer edge of the mapped systems that had filed a supply request 8 months ago and had been told, officially, that the request was under review. She had found the request through a contact who knew her and knew what she did, and had sent it because they thought she might want to know. She had looked at the coordinates. She had looked at her fuel reserves and her ship's current condition, and her finances, which were approximately fine if you were generous about the definition of fine. She had plotted the course. She flew. Provincial's final report was submitted to the Imperial Intelligence Archive 7 weeks after the night of the initial contact. It was classified as a priority review document, meaning it went directly to the Senior Intelligence Council, rather than through the standard filing process. It was 64 pages long, not counting the appendices. The executive summary at the front was 1 page. The last section of the executive summary contained the threat reclassification recommendation, which was the part that circulated most widely afterward, passed from desk to desk and console to console, through the various levels of the hegemonic administration, copied into sub-reports and briefing documents and committee meeting notes, until fragments of it appeared in places Provincial had not intended them to appear. It read, Human Species Threat Index, reclassified, previous classification, low pre-space flight, passive observation, new classification, unquantifiable. Standard threat assessment metrics do not apply. Humans do not respond to deterrence in predictable patterns. Analysis of behavioral history indicates this is not a tactical choice or a cultural affectation but a fundamental characteristic of the species. They appear to assess risk differently than any other spacefaring civilization in the registry. Where other species weigh danger against capability and adjust approach accordingly, humans appear to weigh danger against what they consider necessary and adjust capability to match the necessity. This makes them very difficult to deter. It also makes them, under the right conditions, extremely useful. Recommend reclassification of human civilization from passive observation to active engagement protocol. Recommend establishment of formal diplomatic contact through appropriate channels. Recommend immediate review of all hegemonic colony and outpost welfare records in sectors adjacent to human accessible space. Additional note, personal observation from lead analyst. The primary danger humans represent is not their weapons or their aggression. It is their willingness to go somewhere anyway. They calculate what is necessary, and then they go. This capability is not dependent on resources, or authorization, or institutional support. A single human in a single ship with a greenhouse where the guns should be crossed our border and changed a situation that our entire administrative apparatus had failed to address in 6 years. We should pay attention to that. Admiral Vethkaruan read the report on a Tuesday. A quiet one, as Tuesdays went. He read the executive summary. He read the full 64 pages, including the appendices, because he was the kind of person who read the appendices. He made notes in the margins. When he reached the final recommendation section, where Provincial had left a blank space labeled Commanding Officer Addendum Optional, he sat for a while. He thought about the night the blip appeared, the empty field in the registry, the music coming through the speakers on the old frequency, the singer's voice winding through words about water and weather, and the choice to go into the storm. He thought about Dara Osei's voice on the channel, flat and direct and tired in the way that goes below tired, into something load-bearing. Somebody had to go. So I went. He thought about 14,000 people, trending upward. He picked up his stylus and he wrote in the addendum space. He did not write much. He was not a man who wrote more than was needed. He wrote, "They go because somebody has to. Begin monitoring all unregistered vessels immediately. Assume they are carrying something we need." He signed it. He submitted the report. Ensign Dolofen had been on the border for 3 months now. He had written many reports. Some of them were 2 pages about things that turned out to be gas. His senior officer had told him again that the reports were thorough and also unnecessary, and he had filed them anyway, because he believed in thorough reports, and this was not going to change. He was at the scanner station, his station, the one he thought of as his on a quiet night cycle, when the communication system picked something up on the old frequency, the one from the archives, the one they had logged in the incident report under the heading First Contact Event Human Vessel, see attached documentation. He almost missed it. He was half focused on the sector map, and half focused on a report he was drafting about an interesting debris pattern in Sector Grid 7, and the signal came through so quietly that it took him a moment to realize what he was hearing. He pulled it up and turned up the volume. It was music. Not the same ship. The last reasonable options beacon was somewhere out in the outer systems, far from this sector. This was a different signal, from a different direction, on the same old frequency, different voice, different song. But the structure was similar, the shape of it, the way it moved through its verses, and came back to something. He did not know what the song was about. He would ask the communications team to translate it in the morning. He sat at his station, and he listened. The scanner was clear. The sector was quiet. The stars outside did whatever stars do, which is nothing and everything simultaneously, burning their old light across the dark, with the patience of things that do not need anyone to notice them to keep going. Somewhere out there, a human ship was broadcasting music on a frequency old enough that nobody was supposed to be using it anymore. Dolofen thought about the night the first blip appeared, about the admiral standing at the view screen, looking at a battered freighter with a greenhouse where its guns should be, and the silence on the bridge that had not been a frightened silence but something different, something closer to the silence of people confronting something that did not fit inside what they thought they knew. He thought about the number 14,000, trending upward, which had appeared in a report that had passed through the bridge 2 weeks ago, and which he had read 3 times. He looked at the scanner. No blip. Just stars and dark and the old signal carrying its music across the distance. He did not know yet what it meant. He was 22 years old and he had been doing this for 3 months, and there was a great deal he did not know yet. He would. He pulled up a new report form and started filling it in. Unregistered signal, old frequency, origin, human. He paused over the threat assessment field, the box where you wrote down whether something was dangerous or not, because that was the point of the field. That was what it was for. He thought about what the admiral had written in the addendum, the sentence that had been quietly circulated and was already becoming the kind of sentence people repeated to each other in corridors and attached to the bottom of memos. Assume they are carrying something we need. He left the threat assessment field blank. He filed a note in the comments section instead. Signal is music. Recommend full translation. Recommend we listen. He submitted the report. Outside, across the dark, the music kept playing. It played for anyone willing to listen on an old frequency, on an old channel that the Empire had long since stopped using, and the humans had apparently decided was still perfectly good. The song went on. So did they.